Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians and the land in which we're meeting today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I would extend that respect to acknowledge any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in the room today. I acknowledge their deep wisdom and enduring care for children, families, and community, and that continues to inspire us to do the work that we do. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's always a joy to come together with people who care so deeply about the well-being of children and families. Sorry, Ran. The Canberra Mothercraft Society has a long and proud history of supporting parents and children, and today's celebration of the Mary Kirk Fellowship is one of our most meaningful and significant events in that tradition. The Mary Kirk Fellowship is a celebration of excellence, of supporting evidence-based learning, public dialogue and leadership in early childhood wellbeing. It's also a celebration of our community, which is experienced here today, so we are very appreciative of you joining us and participating in this event. We acknowledge and are grateful for the dedication that you give, your time, experience, expertise to strengthen families across Canberra. Today is about honouring the spirit and recognising the work that continues to shape the lives of children and young people in meaningful ways. Mary Kirk's legacy is woven into the fabric of this organisation. Her compassion, leadership and belief in the power of support for early families continues to guide us. The fellowship bears her name, but isn't just an award, it's a reminder of the standard that she set and the spirit that she brought to this work. We honour her today, and not only through recognition, but through our ongoing commitment to the values that she championed. We are very fortunate to have been joined today by Rachel Stephen-Smith, MLA, whose long-standing friendship of the Canberra Mothercraft Society means a great deal to us. Thank you. Her support for families, early childhood development and community wellbeing is not just professional, it's heartfelt, and we see that in her dedication and showing up for us all the time. Thank you. And we're very grateful to have her here with us today. Fran told me to slow down and I'm trying. We are also very delighted to welcome Dr Phil Baker, who will be delivering this year's public lecture. His insight, generosity and dedication to improving outcomes for children and families makes him an ideal contributor to today's program, and we're looking forward to hearing from him shortly. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome up Rachel Stephen-Smith to speak, and thanks for being a part of this event and joining us today.
Thank you so much, Yuma. Good evening, everyone. I also want to start by acknowledging that we're on the beautiful land of the Ngunnawal people and paying respect to elders past and present and emerging, and recognising everything that we can learn from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about the care and value of family and kin and children and young people. I also want to recognise Mary Kirk AM, patron of the Mary Kirk Fellowship and former Executive Officer of Canberra Mothercraft Society and Director of Nursing and Midwifery at QE2 Family Centre from 1996 to 2019. Dr Sipaka AO, paediatrician, former Senior Australian of the Year and one of Canberra's true living treasures. And I think Dr Caries is here from the AMA. I haven't seen her, but was going to be here. And of course, Phillip Baker, who we'll hear from shortly. I want to thank Canberra Mothercraft Society for the opportunity to be here and launch the lecture this evening. And to highlight, this lecture is an important highlight of the work of one of Canberra's longest running non-government organisations that has been supporting families of young children in Canberra and the surrounding region since 1926. So a really important anniversary this year. Tonight's lecture, as we said, is being delivered by Dr Phillip Baker, an Australian Research Council Future Fellow, which brings back memories of being innovation advisor and Horizon Fellow at the School of Public Health at the University of Sydney, and a leading Australian expert on ultra-processed foods. Dr Baker, I'm sure, will introduce himself, but he was an advisor to UNICEF's Child Nutrition Report 2025, Feeding Profit, and co-author of the 2025 Lancet Report on ultra-processed foods and children. The ACT government recognises that it is a challenge for both families and governments to address the growing dominance of ultra-processed foods. We know that the local food environment influences what we all eat and how we feed our families every day. This includes the availability, affordability, convenience, and promotion of food and drink. The influences and contexts in which we live our busy lives can lead to a dominance of unhealthy food and drinks that can make it difficult to make healthy choices. But we also know that lifelong positive dietary habits and food preferences are established during childhood and in the context of family. Enhancing knowledge and skills about healthy eating among families is important. The ACT government remains committed to supporting the health and well-being of our youngest Canberrans and providing opportunities and environments to support them to grow and thrive. Many of you will know that the Best Start for Canberra's Children, the First 1,000 Days strategy, is an ACT government priority that aims over the next decade to provide earlier and better supports to children and their families to ensure that children in the ACT get the best start in life. The strategy recognises that good nutrition during preconception and early infancy is essential for healthy growth and development. Similarly, Maternity in Focus, the Maternity System Plan, sets out reforms to strengthen care during pregnancy, birth, and early parenting. Initiatives include enhanced breastfeeding support throughout pregnancy, at birth, and during the early parenting phase, ensuring families receive consistent evidence-based guidance to optimise maternal and infant health outcomes. Something, of course, that Canberra Mothercraft Society is, that's its reason for being, and that QE2 continues to deliver. In addition, in 2025, the ACT government, in partnership with the Capital Region Community Services, delivered the Infant Feeding Active Play and Nutrition, or INFANT pilot program, which focused on promoting optimal nutrition, physical activity, and reducing screen time from birth. The final evaluation of the infant program is due for completion and release shortly, and early indications are that while there were some positive impacts of it, I think we still have a lot more to learn about how we get a wider reach into the community and deliver lasting change for families over time. Because there have been concerns over many years from public health and advocacy groups on the nutritional quality, labelling and marketing of baby and toddler foods in Australia. It's certainly a topic that Food Ministers' meeting, which I've been part of for some years, has discussed many times, and FMM has set priorities to strengthen regulation and guidance for food products intended for infants and young children. In April last year, FMM agreed on a policy position to guide approaches for improving commercial foods for infants and young children. And in November, the year before, FMM requested that FSANZ, the regulatory body, review how toddler formula is regulated. The review commenced in September last year, and public consultation is planned for early 2026, and the whole review is expected to take 12 months. The voluntary Health Star rating system that allows food manufacturers to choose to add a star label rating to their packaging to indicate how it compares to similar products will also be the subject of discussion in ongoing months, including consideration of mandating Health Star ratings. So these discussions also need to consider how ratings currently work for consumers and for manufacturers alike. I think we can all agree that children deserve good nutrition that supports their growth, development and health in infancy, early childhood and throughout their lives. It's a complex conversation with experts and the community. And I would really like to thank Canberra Mothercraft Society for its tireless work on health and wellbeing for women, children and families. I really look forward to Dr Baker's discussion on how we can look to the future to envision a food system where healthier diets are accessible and affordable for all. And just before I close, I also want to recognise, taking off my health hat and putting on my public service hat, that we have been doing some work on the future of the Wakefield Gardens site where Canberra Mothercraft Society was previously based. And I want to thank CMS for the input to date and ideas around that, the future of that site, and to assure you that we will continue to engage with CMS as we think about how we can create a site that a community-based site there that really recognises the history of that place in Ainslie, where so many neighbourhood children and their families got incredible support from CMS over so many years. So thank you very much for having me this evening, and I look forward to the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Welcome you up. Yes, come on up. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, Tish, for the warm welcome. Thank you, Rachel, for those opening remarks and for your leadership and the leadership of the ACT government. And thank you to the Canberra Mothercraft Society and its executive and its members, to Gia, for organising this Mary Kirk Fellowship and the lecture. It is an absolute privilege and an honour to be here to give this lecture. And this lecture is informing a research paper that I will be preparing over the coming months with some great colleagues on this topic. I'd also like to say I'm a huge fan of Canberra. I lived here for 7 years. I lived in the Lentil Belt, otherwise known as Turner, Lynham, O'Connor and Ainslie. I have very fond memories, some great friends sitting here in the audience and colleagues, Julie Smith, Libby Salmon and others from ANU where I did my PhD. So it's great to do a boomerang and come back here. I would like to start this talk by just a brief overview of the state of Australian infants and young children when it comes to their diet, their nutrition and health, because this is just a way to anchor the presentation. And I might just turn on my stopwatch so I don't go over time. Breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is, of course, acknowledged as the most important start to life and to any healthy and sustainable diet. In Australia, most mothers and infants, that dyad initiates breastfeeding at birth. But by 6 months, just 37.5% are exclusively breastfeeding. So 2/3 of infants are not meeting the WHO and NHMRC recommendation to breastfeed to 6 months. When it comes to complementary feeding and first foods, just 20% of 2 to 3 year olds in Australia are meeting the recommendation of 4.5 servings of vegetables a day. And this drops down to just 4.5% once you get into older childhood and adolescence. The good news is most kids are getting their fruit recommendation, but on veggies, it's pretty terrible. Discretionary foods, which is what we call junk food in the Australian dietary guidelines. And the guidelines are under review, so it will be interesting to see what they call these foods. Will they call them ultra-processed foods or not, like they have with the American dietary guidelines? But we know that 27% of the total energy intake of 2 to 4 year olds in Australia comes from discretionary foods. Biscuits, confectionery, salty snack foods, sugary drinks, and so on. And with overweight and obesity, 1/4 of our 2 to 4 year olds are overweight or obese. So it's I don't want to start with such a depressing start to this talk, but this is just to contextualize where we stand in Australia. I'd also like to just say that this talk I'm giving today is also built upon the research that we have done over many years with colleagues from all around the world, and some colleagues who are here in the room today, including Julie Smith, including the 2023 Lancet Breastfeeding series, where we examine in very deep and in great detail the marketing of commercial milk formulas and the displacement of breastfeeding all around the world. And that includes our paper on the political economy of infant and young child feeding, which addresses these commercial determinants, gender, and other structural determinants of infant and young child feeding practices around the world. The second is the 2025 Lancet series on ultra-processed foods, which just came out in November last year. 3 papers covering the science, the policy, and the political dimensions of this topic, of this issue of ultra-processed foods. And in this series, we call for ultra-processed foods to be prioritized and recognized as a distinct global health problem of concern. We are launching this series in Australia on Friday at the University of Sydney. It's a shameless plug to say if you'd like to come along and join us and deep dive more into this topic, please join us online or in person. Third are a number of UNICEF and WHO reports and guidance documents. This includes the recent Child Nutrition Report, Feeding Profit, the state-of-the-art review on ultra-processed foods and children, which we published in co-authored and published in December, and the guidance from the World Health Organization on ending the inappropriate promotion of foods marketed for infants and young children. And finally, this talk is very much informed by a wonderful group of researchers, network of researchers and organizations in Australia, including the Infant and Toddler Foods Research Alliance, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative Australia, the Food for Health Alliance, and First Steps Nutrition Trust. Researchers, advocates across these organizations have done some incredible research, and I will be citing that research throughout my presentation today, which will have 3 objectives. The first, I will answer this question: what are ultra-processed foods? What are their impacts on human health, and in particular on infants and young children? Second, why ultra-processed foods are taking over their diets, focusing on the structural and commercial drivers. So this is not about individual responsibility or parental responsibility or a lack of willpower on behalf of individuals. This is a structural and commercial explanation for this problem. And third, I will focus on what policy actions are needed to turn the situation around. I will talk about the powerful corporate actors that are standing in the way and the state of policy play in Australia. Now, the NOVA food classification, you may or may not have come across this, but this is a food classification that came out in 2010, so it's only 16 years old, and it classifies foods based on the extent and the purpose of processing. This was a major deviation from a paradigm shift in how we think about foods. For decades, we've been thinking about unhealthy foods just in terms of nutrients, sugar, salt, and fat, for example, and that's really important, and it still remains important. What this new food classification helps to explain is why our diets are shifting and becoming more abundant in these ultra-processed food products in particular, and the impacts that food processing itself has on human health over and above those effects of nutrients. Now, the NOVA food classification has 4 categories: unprocessed and minimally processed foods, group 1, processed culinary ingredients, the stuff we use to cook at home, for example, and processed foods, group number 3. Now, these first 3 categories of foods are the foods that we have consumed as humans for thousands and thousands of years. They are the basis of traditional dietary patterns. The Mediterranean diet, for example, is a dietary pattern comprising these three groups of foods. And these dietary patterns have been well studied, and many of them are well described as healthy and sustainable dietary patterns. What a group led by Carlos Monteiro and his colleagues in Brazil recognized was that obesity rates were going up in the Brazilian population very rapidly. From the 1990s onwards, this could not be explained by a change in the nutrient consumption of that population. When they looked at the foods and the dietary pattern, they realized that it was this growth in ultra-processed foods that was the explanatory, or very likely the causal explanatory reason for this rise in obesity. Now, they characterized ultra-processed foods as being very different from these first three groups of foods. Ultra-processed foods are commercial products. They only resemble food. They don't actually contain any intact whole food. In the sense, they are assemblages of industrial ingredients. And by industrial ingredients, I mean ingredients that you would never use in your home kitchen. They are also emphatically branded, almost always wrapped in plastic. And they come with the singular purpose of maximizing profits of the corporations that produce them. And I'll say more on this in a moment. The purpose of processing with Nova Groups 1 to 3 is food security, extending the shelf life. It's improving the nutrition, the safety, and making really important contributions to food culture. These foods have been a part of food cultures all around the world, including our First Nations culture for First Nations peoples here in Australia. Ultra-processed foods are identifiable by the presence of the markers of ultra-processing. These are the ingredients of exclusive industrial use. Flip over that packet in the supermarket, look at the ingredients. If you see the protein isolates, if you see the deodorized vegetable oils like palm, if you see the sweeteners, the colors, the flavors, the emulsifiers, it's an ultra-processed food. Now, this is something I describe myself these days as a social scientist and as a political economist. I explain changes in dietary patterns at the population level by looking at the underlying economics of our food system. And one of the things we looked at in the Lancet series that just came out on ultra-processed foods is that ultra-processed foods are by far the most profitable way of producing food. So you can get way more profit as a corporation, as a business, out of producing Dorito corn chips as you can from producing a can of corn, as you can from producing just corn. And you can do that because you can use these cheap industrial ingredients. You can use the soy, the palm oil, the sugarcane, the protein isolates, et cetera, to reduce the costs of producing that corn chip. Corn chip doesn't contain corn, it contains stuff that's been extracted from corn. And that's produced by using industrial agriculture very, very cheaply. So you can source these ingredients extremely cheaply. You combine those ingredients with a lot of fat, sugar, and salt, with cosmetic additives like flavorings, colorings, emulsifiers, and so on to make the product super soft and to make it super tasty. And what does that do? It makes people eat more of that food, which makes people buy more of the food. You combine all of that together, you're packing way more profit margin into an ultra-processed food than other types of foods. If you zoom out then to the broader food system, this has profound implications for why our food system is changing in the way it is. We live in a capitalist society. That is undeniable. No one would argue against that. In a capitalist society, it is the most profitable firms and industries that attract the most investment. It is the most profitable firms and industries which accumulate the most resources. Because if your profit margins are so much higher, you can spend way more money on doing things to promote your products and reshape the food system. Now, we analysed the profitability of ultra-processed food manufacturers compared to companies that are producing other types of foods. We found that these companies are way more profitable than other types of food companies. And in fact, when you look at the shareholder distributions over many decades, going back to 1962, more than half of all shareholder distributions were just from a small number of UPF manufacturers. These are ultra profitable companies. They use those extra profits to build more factories, to expand their production networks into more and more countries. They use those large profits to spend vast sums of money on corporate marketing and promotion. You can look at the company reports and see how much they spend on marketing. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Mondelez, the three of the biggest together spend over $16 billion every year on marketing and promotion. It's a figure that's 4 times the annual operating budget of the World Health Organization. That's just three companies. Now, you can also use your exorbitant and excessive profits to pay for lobbyists, to pay for lawyers, to take over our public institutions, to influence our policy and our regulation, making sure that there are no threats to the continuation of your marketing, of your expansion, and of any opposition that you face. Another thing that's important to understand is that these companies are not just competing with each other for market share. It's not just Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. They are also competing with other types of foods in the food system. Ultra-processed food manufacturers are competing with those companies that are producing Nova Groups 1 to 3. And this quote here really perfectly captures that. What's our most underdeveloped market? The human body. We're focused on expanding our share of every human being's fluid intake. There's some 1 trillion gallons of liquid people around the world consume each year. In some cases, that means taking on other international soft drink companies. In other cases, indigenous beverages are our biggest contenders. When it comes to availability and accessibility, however, only one beverage is our true rival, and that is tap water. And the executives of the companies actually use this language. It's not about share of soft drinks. It's mouth share. It's stomach share. It's the share of babies' throats or throat share. Now, in the Lancet series, we show that ultra-processed foods are on the rise nearly everywhere. These are the time trends for 9 countries with national purchasing and food intake surveys. You can clearly show that the share of ultra-processed foods in the diet, the proportion of the diet or calories in the diet made up of ultra-processed food is increasing across all of these countries. Now, we don't have good data for Australia, longitudinal data. We have a single data point. And it goes back to 2011 and 12, which show that 42% of our calories in Australia come from ultra-processed foods. We have an ultra-processed national diet. I think that figure is now hovering somewhere above 50% if we were to update that survey. And this is where Australia stands relative to all other world countries in terms of the sales of ultra-processed foods per capita relative to the growth of sales in ultra-processed foods. And you can see we're right out on that long right-hand side tail in terms of being among the highest consumers or having one of the largest markets for ultra-processed food in the world. In the Lancet series, we also undertake the most extensive examination of the evidence of ultra-processed foods and how they impact on human health. I'm sorry for these slides that keep skipping, by the way. I'm not sure why that does it. We find through a systematic review and a meta-analysis of 104 observational studies. So this is not just 1 or 2 studies. This is 104 observational studies from research groups all over the world. These are independent research groups. We took all of that evidence together. We took all of that data from as many of those studies as we could. We joined it together to maximize the statistical power of the analysis. And we found that ultra-processed foods the share of ultra-processed food in the diet associates with multiple adverse health outcomes that are affecting all human body organ systems. That includes Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is an inflammatory condition of the gut, possibly caused by the degradation of the gut microflora and mucosal lining, triggering inflammation, but we're still figuring that one out. Abdominal obesity, dyslipidemia, type 2 diabetes, these are metabolic disorders, depression and mental ill health, and there is emerging evidence around dementia and Parkinson's and hyperactivity disorder amongst children. And the list goes on. You can see those health outcomes on the left-hand side there. The point is affecting all body organ systems, and that is this is telling us that our human bodies are not well adapted to consuming these foods. These are not foods that we have evolved to eat. These are novel foods in an evolutionary context. Now, these harmful associations can be explained by a number of plausible mechanisms or reasons. Like, how do we explain why ultra-processed foods are causing these impacts on human health? Lancet series, we also dive into this and we give 3 explanations. Here they are on the screen. First of all, multiple nutrient imbalances. Now, this comes from a meta-analysis of national dietary surveys covering 13 countries, including Australia. And basically, as the share of ultra-processed foods goes up in the diet of the population, we see markers of poor diet quality, total fat, saturated fat, and added sugar, all go up. Markers of good diet quality, fiber, protein, and potassium, all go down. So ultra-processed foods and the diets made up of ultra-processed foods are unbalanced in nutrients. High in fat, sugar, and salt, and low in the good stuff. We also show, based on a number of randomized control trials, and there are now at least 5 of these randomized control trials, that ultra-processed foods, there's something about ultra-processed foods which cause excessive energy intake. This comes from randomized control trials, where they basically put people in a lab, they control what they eat for 1 or 2 weeks, they feed them ultra-processed foods for a couple of those weeks, they see what happens, and then they swap them over to a diet made up of non-ultra-processed foods, those NOVA groups 1 to 3, and they all show pretty much the same thing. People consume between 500 and 800 excess calories a day. There's a new RCT that's about to be published that has 1,000 extra calories a day, and they put on fat mass and body weight. Now, I think this might be explained by a number of interesting things about ultra-processed foods. One is that they're higher in energy density. So per gram of ultra-processed food, you're probably getting twice the calories as you are per gram of other types of foods, those NOVA groups 1 to 3. So you're packing in more energy per bite. The second is that these are hyperpalatable foods. They have 2 characteristics here. One is they're soft in texture. So you don't have to chew as much to consume them. That may increase the rate at which we eat them and the rate at which they pass through our gut. And that is very relevant to infant and young child foods, which I'll come to later. And second of all, these are also full of low in water content, and they replace that water with fat, sugar, and salt. And cosmetic additives, the flavorings, the colorings, the emulsifiers, to make these foods ultra tasty or hyperpalatable, which encourages us to eat more of the food. And there's that old saying and jingle, once you pop, you can't stop, from Pringles, which is precisely what that means. The third reason is exposure to xenobiotics. And the xenobiotics is basically a fancy word for saying these are objects that are foreign to the human body. This includes toxic compounds created during processing, like acrylamide, through high temperature cooking of high carbohydrate foods, like your McDonald's chips, for example. Toxic compounds released from plastic packaging. These foods, ultra-processed foods, have very long shelf lives, and hence they are in contact with plastic packaging for a much longer time than minimally processed foods. And there's a leaching of the phthalates, the bisphenols, into the food, and PFAS is another one which we're just seeing come out. And finally, chemical compounds added by the industry, which we call additives. artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, colorers, flavors, mixtures or cocktails of these additives that have biological effects in the body, including the disruption of the gut microflora and some inflammatory effects and neurological effects. Now, pivoting now, that's basically a crash course in ultra-processed foods and the evidence that we've accumulated. Pivoting now to infants and young children who are uniquely vulnerable to ultra-processed foods for a number of key reasons. First, unhealthy diets have profound consequences during critical periods of growth and development. Early and repeated exposure to ultra-processed foods conditions lifelong taste preferences. And finally, children are cognitively vulnerable to marketing in ways that adults are not, especially with a limited capacity to critically evaluate the persuasive intent and content of commercial messaging and marketing. And we unpack all of this in the UNICEF state-of-the-art review on ultra-processed foods and children. We also present the evidence of what are the specific impacts of ultra-processed foods on child health and well-being. And it's very consistent with what we found in what I just presented in the Lancet series. There's good evidence to show that when children eat ultra-processed foods, the quality of their diet goes down, they're nutrient imbalanced, that these are linked with early child overweight and obesity, and importantly with dental erosion and caries. And this is a really key one, the impacts on the developing teeth, on the developing jaw and orofacial muscles is something we need to understand and pay a lot more attention to. There's also emerging evidence around stunting. This is evidence from low and middle income countries, micronutrient deficiencies and anemia, which is low iron, metabolic alterations like fatty liver disease and cardiometabolic risk factors like hyperlipidemia, lower academic achievement in school, and finally mental ill health, including depression. And of course, this is a big concern amongst our teenagers. Now, what are commercial foods for infants and young children? This is a term we use to describe these foods that come from commercial sources. We refer to these as or those that can be recognized by being labeled as suitable or marketed as suitable for ages 6 to 36 months. They carry the words baby, toddler, or some other word like that, or they carry the image of an infant, or they may be represented in any other way to be suitable for this age group. And they include products, the following products. The first are the commercial milk formulas. Now, infant formula is one that we are cautious about as labeling an ultra-processed food for the fear of stigmatizing the use of infant formula when it is necessary. However, it is an ultra-processed food. Just like follow-on formulas are ultra-processed foods and growing up and toddler milks. We also include infant formulas I include them in this presentation because they are cross-promoted with follow-on formulas and growing up and toddler milks. You can see the images of the products on the top left there, the similar packaging, the branding. The companies use this cross-promotion to get around the regulation of infant formula by cross-promoting the toddler milks and follow-up formulas. The second category are these commercial complementary foods. No, sorry, all commercial milk formulas are ultra-processed foods. Commercial complementary foods are not all ultra-processed. They span all four of the Nova groups, but many of them are ultra-processed, and I'll tell you how many of them in a moment. They include the cereal mixes, the confectionery, the dairy foods, the desserts, fruits and vegetable purees, juices, flavored milks and smoothies, pureed meals and soups, and snack foods marketed, promoted for infants and young children. The history behind these products is really interesting. Infant formula was invented in the 1860s. This image of Nestlé's original formulas from 1897, when Nestlé started getting involved. The sales all around the world of infant formula really started to take off because Nestlé was a pioneer of the medical marketing of these products. In the 1930s and 40s, we started to see the introduction of other types of formulas, formulas for older infants, specialized formulas for lactose intolerance, and also the introduction of these toddler foods as well. So the purees, we saw brands like Gerber in the United States, brands like Waddy's and Heinz in Australia really started to take off during this period. But it was really from the 1980s onwards that these products really started to explode worldwide. And it was really interesting what happened in this time. In 1981, the World Health Organization, member states of the WHO, came together and said, we need to regulate the marketing of breast milk substitutes because this marketing is causing great harm to infants and mothers worldwide, contributing to tens of thousands of infant deaths. And they adopted the International Code of Marketing on breast milk substitutes in 1981. And that has been updated every 2 years since then through consecutive World Health Assembly resolutions, which update that code. Now, the industry at that moment had a bit of a panic situation because they were like, oh my God, our major product category, infant formula, is about to be more heavily regulated. So what did they do? Did they slow down? No way. They put the pedal to the metal. And actually, since 1981, they have increased the global sales of commercial milk formulas 36-fold. It is a massive increase from 1.5 billion to about 36 billion US dollars globally since 1981. How did they do that? Well, one of the main ways in which they did it was to start much more intensively promoting toddler milks and follow-up formulas for older infants and young children, which, by the way, are recognized by the World Health Organization and UNICEF as being completely unnecessary for a healthy infant and young child diet, and are in many ways also harmful. Now, this history is also reflected in long-term trends in infant and young child feeding indicators, and thank you to Julie for sharing this data we see here on the screen. In Norway and Australia, these are long-term trends in breastfeeding rates. You can see this precipitous decline in breastfeeding during the mid-1900s, reaching peak bottom at around the 1970s. This was linked with the medicalization of pregnancy and birth, the promotion of these formulas through healthcare systems, through hospitals, for example, and of course, through the marketing of the products themselves. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Now, the graph on the right-hand side is the accepted age of introducing foods in the United States from 1880 to 2000. It's fascinating because that accepted age went from around 11 months in 1880 down to just 4 to 6 weeks in the 50s and 60s, and has since gone back up to around 5 to 6 months nowadays. So there has been a remarkable transition in infant and young child feeding practices in these high-income countries, including Australia, and a lot of this is linked to the products that we are talking about. This is another graph showing the rise of these foods in infant and young child diets globally, looking at lower middle, upper middle, and high-income countries. Australia's in that high-income country graph on the far right side there. This is another way of looking at that data. This is an analysis we did in the expansion of global production and trade in these commercial milk formulas. And you can see that there has been a huge change just since 2005. And the amount of formula that's being produced globally, especially in China, but also in the trade of these products across international borders, and especially in the export of these products to China and other Southeast Asian countries, of which Australia is a major producer and exporter, which may explain why we're not regulating these products. Now, turning to Australia, this is market sales data that I pulled off Euromonitor a couple of days ago, a market information database showing that the sales of these foods in Australia is about 700 million Australian dollars into last year. The peak in sales was sometime around 2016 when it was 850 million. And the market has grown remarkably since 2011. It's actually doubled in size between 2011 and 2016. You can see that the growth in these products plummeted, the sales plummeted during the COVID-19 pandemic. You might ask that question, why is that? And one reason might be that mums and families thought that breastfeeding was protective against COVID. Another reason is that mums and babies and families were just in close proximity to each other. And disrupting that proximity is actually a major, major problem in contemporary society. So COVID was a very interesting case study. Now, in terms of these products in Australia today, as I just said, the total sales doubled between 2011 and 2016. The number of toddler food products launched onto the Australian market also doubled between 2014 and 2018. So this is just the number of products, not the actual sales of the products. This indicates that there is a great amount of commercial interest in inventing these products and releasing these products to the market. There's a great commercial interest in growing the market and profiting from it. Now, the share of infant and young child diets that comprise these foods, I couldn't really find good data, but if you ask parents themselves how much of their child's diet comes from these foods, the Royal Children's Hospital poll from 2022 suggested that for 39% of babies, ready-made foods made up at least half or more of their diet in 2022. And of those who consumed ready-made foods, for 22% of those, these made up most or all of the entire diet of the child. So they are being consumed in very significant amounts in the Australian population. Now let's evaluate these foods, and I'm going to take you through, I'm going to evaluate these foods now through different lenses. The first is composition. Now, one good way to evaluate the composition of these foods is to use the best possible nutrient profiling model in the world, and that is the one invented by the World Health Organization European Office called the Nutrient and Promotion Profile Model. This evaluates these products for their composition and prohibits the use of or the addition of free sugars, fruit juices, syrups, honey, non-sugar sweeteners, and any marketing of confectionery and sweetened drinks. And products must meet these compositional thresholds in order to be marketed or to carry claims on them. Evaluations using this model in Australia find that about 28%, 23% of these products are not meeting any of the, only 28% of these products meet all of the requirements of this model. 23 or 22% meet the nutritional requirements, and 0% meet the promotional requirements. So this says that if this model of profiling these foods was implemented in Australia, none of them would be allowed to promote the food or put claims on the packaging because they are that unhealthy. Let's look at the degree of processing, the composition, and texture. In terms of ultra-processed foods, 85% of toddler foods and milks evaluated in retail environments by Jen McCann, ultra-processed. 63% of infant and toddler snack foods, ultra-processed. In terms of sweetness and sugar content, fruit purees and powders are often the main ingredients used in these foods, and often sweet vegetable varieties like sweet potato and carrot. They have a very sweet taste. Survey studies report 40 to 75% of products contain added or free sugars. All toddler milks contain higher energy and total sugar levels than full-fat cow's milk per 100 mils. In terms of texture, 90% in one evaluation of these products were categorized as smooth, and just 30% had a developmentally appropriate lumpy texture. Now, in terms of additives, if we had to say what additives are permitted under Australian law to be used in infant and young child foods, or are permitted under Codex Alimentarius, which is the UN food regulator, under their standards and guidelines, what proportion of products contain these additives? We don't know that in Australia, as far as I can tell. This has not been an evaluation, but we looked at 7 Southeast Asian countries, and we found that over 30% of these products contain cosmetic additives, the ones I mentioned earlier, to enhance appearance, flavor, or texture. Mostly emulsifiers, colorings, and thickeners were the most common. Almost 1/3 of the products used additives that were not permitted under Codex standards and guidelines for infant and young child foods. So these are unsafe. A lot of these additives are not passing the safety requirements either. So these companies are putting these additives in, and it's not legal or not compliant with the Codex standards. Now, what's interesting about the packaging recently is that we have seen this huge surge in the amount of these products that are packaged in pouches. Pouches represent more than 50% of all products available now, that according to some of these evaluations. Now, this is really important, because what happens when you put a food in a pouch? You no longer have the sensory experience of eating that food. The smell, the taste, the smell and the sight is no longer visible. You're also straining that food. If the child is eating it through the nozzle, through the teeth, the sugar is affecting the oral health of the child quite profoundly. The serving sizes of these products are not appropriate, not age appropriate. Hence, if children are consuming the whole product, they are sometimes getting 4, 5, 6 times more of their daily intake of some of these things, including sugars. So these pouches are a big concern. They're also just plastic, disposable plastic. Now, when we look at why, let's move now to determinants. Why are these foods becoming so much more prevalent in the diet? At the household level, we can look at why we ask parents, why do you choose these foods? The main reasons are convenience. They think they are a healthy choice. They're low cost or cheap. The child prefers the taste, or they have a lack of food preparation or knowledge. In the UNICEF review, we also found that it may be the lack of a kitchen, cooking facilities. There are also safe water for preparation and so on. There are also socioeconomic considerations here. Consumption on most days of the week of these foods is more common among sole parent families and among children of parents with lower education levels of year 12 or less. Now, this has really profound implications when you think about we are experiencing a cost of living crisis in Australia, a sustained cost of living crisis. Families and households with dependent children, I think it's around 11 or 12% of those households are experiencing food insecurity. But this goes well above 30% for households where you only have a single parent. This is telling us that parents just simply do not have the resources to source, prepare, and feed their children healthy foods. This very much profoundly relates to social protection, the access to paid maternity leave, to child payments, to having livable wage, and the amount of income that families are generating through their salaries and wages. And we know that for many years now, that family incomes and salaries and wages have been stagnating. So you can buy less food for the same amount of wage, and prices are going up. So this is also a really important and profound driver of why families are perhaps turning to these foods. Now, the second main determinant that I'm going to talk about is commercial, and particularly marketing. I mentioned medical marketing, health professionals, doctors, pediatricians, allergists, dietitians, nutritionists, and influencers who may not even be qualified in any of these professions are co-opted and used as influencers to basically promote these products. And we know this from pretty extensive studies on commercial milk formula. The second way of marketing is direct to consumer through print media. If you're watching television or billboards or YouTube at the moment, as I am, watching midwife videos because we have a baby due in 4 weeks, you will see advertisements for these products all over the content telling you about home birth and midwifery care. And the third are product strategies. So these are the claims you see on the products, the cross promotion I talked about earlier, these functional ingredients. They're convincing parents to purchase these foods. Turning to promotional claims, these are extensively used on products in Australia. Up to 21 different claims were found on product packaging. On average, these products are displaying 6.7 claims in Australia. No products evaluated in Australia meet the requirements for the WHO profiling model I mentioned earlier. These claims profoundly shape beliefs. Products are considered to be healthier than or as healthy as homemade food when you ask Australian parents. Babies and toddlers have different nutritional needs, meaning they cannot eat regular family foods. Again, beliefs of parents purchasing these foods. The content of products is tightly regulated by government for good nutrition. Parents are trusting government to regulate when we know these foods are in many ways deeply unhealthy. Most of these claims are also just completely bogus. And we know this from an evaluation of the claims on infant formula and commercial milk formula products. 75% of these products claims do not cite any evidence. 90% of referenced clinical trials had a high risk of bias. These are trials funded by industry to basically prop up their marketing. Cross-promotion is a big problem in Australia. The use of similar packaging, branding, labeling to cross-promote infant formula through toddler milks and follow-up formulas and specialised formulas. This has not been addressed in Australia to date, and let's hope it is going to be addressed very soon. Now, finally, the policy package to tackle unhealthy food systems for children. Now, these are the recommendations from the Child Nutrition Report and the State of the Art Review from UNICEF just published. First of all, breastfeeding. Implement the international code and the subsequent resolutions into national law up to the age of 36 months. Australia is considering legislating the marketing of infant formula at the moment, but just 0 to 12 months. If it does, it will be a profound mistake because it is a lost opportunity to fully regulate the code to 0 to 36 months. And that's what we should all be getting behind and advocating for. The second is to implement the WHO 26 guidance on ending the inappropriate promotion of foods for infants and young children. And I would add to that, adopting the nutrient profiling model that I mentioned earlier to help us to profile these foods for infants and young children and to stop the promotional claims going on unhealthy varieties. The third is social protections, giving children and families financial access to time so that they can breastfeed, that they can feed their families the food that they want to, and to address income poverty and wage stagnation in Australia. The fourth are food in schools. Infants and toddlers often have older siblings that go to school. If we get ultra-processed foods out of schools, out of preschools and early education learning environments, this is also a huge win. Infants and toddlers will be eating a lot less ultra-processed foods. The fifth is food marketing, implementing WHO guideline on policies to protect children from the harmful impact of food marketing. This is something Sophie Scamps, David Pocock and others have been talking a lot about in Parliament. We just need to do it. Food labelling, implement mandatory labelling standards, and in the Lancet series, we call for the adoption and implementation of warning labels on products, whereas being much more effective than models like the HSR, like Nutri-Score, and quite frankly, the HSR has been a total policy failure in Australia. It's been in place for over 10 years. It only appears on 30% of products in our supermarkets. Many of those products are ultra-processed, carrying stars, indicating that it has been co-opted as a marketing tool. My recommendation, which goes against that of some others in the public health community, is to ditch HSR and go for warning labels instead. But I also defer to others on this. Number 7, food subsidies. 8 are food taxes, taxing the ultra-processed foods and in particular sugar-sweetened beverages. Reformulating these products where it's possible. And finally, reducing corporate power in public policy and governance in Australia. And I'm just going to finish by talking about corporate power. There's also a minimum policy package to tackle unhealthy commercial foods for infants and young children outlined by the Food for Health Alliance. Focus on labelling and marketing, texture, age appropriateness and composition is also really, really good in those recommendations. And the policy package to protect, promote and support breastfeeding in Australia, and I wish I could give this more time, but it is simply to say fully implement and fund the national breastfeeding strategy that has not been done, and address Australia's abysmal performance when it comes to implementing the World Health Organization's global strategy for infant and young child feeding, including addressing all of these policy areas outlined by the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative Australia. And I would refer you to the website and the important work that they are doing on how Australia can really improve policy action in this space as well. Now, we did have a voluntary agreement, a voluntary code, industry code on the marketing of infant formula in Australia called the MAFE Agreement. The ACCC, the competition regulator in Australia, determined last year that this was no longer fit for purpose. The voluntary industry self-regulation was failing. It was not addressing, it was limited in scope, it was voluntary in nature, and was overall not achieving the public health outcomes that were intended, and called for the making this mandatory, in other words, moving towards something more like legislating the international code. We have two options ahead of us, and this we'll hear from the government in only moments, days, if not weeks on this, to either adopt the WHO code and subsequent resolutions comprehensively into law through an active Australian Parliament. That would be absolutely the best thing for Australian families and babies and toddlers. Mandating these restrictions on products for 0 to 36 months, but also removing or reducing the influence of these companies with our health professionals, addressing the digital marketing, the extensive digital marketing of these products. This can all be done through comprehensive legislation, just like we have comprehensively legislated tobacco control in Australia. The other route that we could be going down, which is much less favourable, is doing this under FSANZ and the Australian New Zealand Food Standards Code, which would only regulate very particular components of the international code. Now I want to shift to governance, and sorry, I am going a little bit over time. I'll try and move through these slides a lot more quickly. We have a profound problem with food governance in Australia. Now, most of my work is focused internationally. I just came back from Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and they do not make policy when it comes to nutrition and food with the food industry. If you are installing a home security system in your house, do you invite the criminals to come in and install it for you? No, it's a ridiculous idea. Why? Because they're going to find loopholes. They're going to break in. In Australia, we design food policy and nutrition policy with the industry. And with these lobby groups, like the Australian Food and Grocery Council, for example, who represent the world's largest transnational food corporations. Are these Australian corporations? Some of them are, but really, who are we talking about here? Why are we letting these transnational corporations govern food and nutrition policy, the health of our infants and children in Australia? It is a ridiculous, when you think about it, it's radical when you think about it. If you look at the communiques that are published by the Healthy Food Partnership, what they do and say, this partnership is, and I will repeat, a complete failure. They focus on the HSR, reformulation, and they have been focusing on these things for years and years and years. There has been very little progress. And that is exactly what industry wants. It doesn't want comprehensive policy. It doesn't want comprehensive regulation. But it says to the minister, it says to government officials, let us work with you. Let us be part of the solution. Let us self-regulate our practices and work with you to improve infant and young child nutrition, all while at the same time, as I showed you before, growing the sales of your products year and year and year, releasing more and more of these harmful products onto the market. Now, this is the evaluation we did for the Lancet series. We mapped the lobby groups, the networks of political influence by the ultra-processed food industry all around the world. This is a visual representation network of those lobby groups in countries all around the world. And these are the main companies who coordinate these lobby groups. They're the members, they're the ones that fund it. When we ask government officials, what is the main barrier to dealing with food marketing to children? 70% of government officials cite industry influence and interference as the main barrier. This is what it looks like in Australia. I'm not going to mince my words. The political influence of these groups are a major source of the problem and why we have not seen any action or very little action in Australia for many decades. Analyses, there have been lots and lots of analyses on this political influence. This is one of those by Catherine Cullerton, showing how these lobbyists are circling, are closely networked with government policymakers. There's also great work by Jennifer Lacey-Nichols, looking at some of these industry practices in the country as well. One of the ways they convince policymakers to say, hey, look, Minister, look, policymakers, you don't need to regulate us because we are already regulating ourselves. And just when the government, the Rudd and Gillard government came out to say, banging the war drums, we're going to regulate industry, we're going to start putting labels and restricting the marketing. The industry comes out almost immediately with these self-regulatory codes, almost right away. Like within days preceding the announcement, they somehow knew the announcement was going to happen, and they come out with these self-regulatory initiatives. Let me be very clear. The Lancet series, the Lancet breastfeeding series, lots of evaluations now show one important finding, that this self-regulation simply does not work. And when governments fail to regulate and legislate, they are violating the rights of the child, and these self-regulatory measures are also violating those rights. The other strategy the companies use is reputation management, corporate social responsibility, portraying themselves as good corporate citizens, all while marketing and promoting these products. And the other is professional capture, sponsoring our health professionals, the pediatricians, the nutritionists, the dietetic associations, influencing them to promote their products and to generate science and evidence that is favourable to industry. Finally, I also like to just say that the Australian government also goes into bat for this industry in the World Trade Organization. When governments all around the world go to legislate the International Code of Marketing, international law, the Australian government, along with the United States, New Zealand, Canada, and the European Union, and what unites those countries? Well, they are major dairy producers, but also home to the largest infant formula and baby food corporations. They all go into the WTO and challenge the regulations of these other governments. And this is a paper we did demonstrating exactly this in the case of Thailand and the significant watering down of Thailand's legislation because of this WTO interference. And I think this also speaks to why we simply do not see regulation in Australia, is because of these trade interests prevailing here rather than the rights and the health of infants and young children. Finally, I'm sorry I've been talking for so long. Let's mobilise a response. Let's do something about this. Let's stop playing cricket with industry and let's start playing rugby. Let's make this more of a contact sport, and let's create these coalitions that we know are really important. Teaming up, getting together. There are some great people and organisations represented in this room. Build these alliances. Be really clear about our messaging. Take those messages to the Australian public, to the media, to our policymakers. Let's say it's time. It's time to get these corporations, this 1,000-pound gorilla, out of the policy-making room. It's time that governance in Australia worked for families, for infants and young children, and not just for the bottom line of some of the world's largest corporations. Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry, I spoke for way too long.
That was fascinating, and I love the passion at the end. Do we have any questions? Comments? Thoughts? Backing?
Hi, let me kick off, get people stirred up. Phil, you mentioned additives to various stuff. Would you like to comment on the current recall of infant formula in 60 countries around the world and the role of regulation in stopping that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Now, commercial milk formula, they have really insane supply chains. These companies are sourcing the ingredients for commercial milk formulas from all around the world. And sometimes these ingredients are profoundly unsafe and cause infant and young child sickness and death. The melamine poisoning in China in 2008 was a good example of that. And just now we have a contamination with Nestle and Danone products with, it's called, I can never pronounce it, arachidonic acid, ARA. Anyway, it's an ingredient they put into formula. It's not necessary to put in formula, but it's an ingredient they put into formula so they can put a claim on the formula to make it sound better and market it. Now, in this case, the supplier of that ingredient was using unsafe production practices, and this ingredient was deeply contaminated with bacteria, and quite a few babies have been sick, and I think some have now died. Yeah, exactly. With the melamine in 2008, many infants died. But this comes down to how we regulate. You know, when we say these products are safe, it does call into question that safety and how we talk about them. But it also deeply and profoundly talks to how we regulate the production of those as well. There was an Abbott factory shut down last year in the United States because of, I was at E. coli or salmonella. And when they went into the factory, they found rat droppings and these vats were cracked open. And so that led to a massive infant formula scarcity and a really bad food security problem in the United States. So it's really important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. That was brilliant. My name's Leanne. I'm from Nutrition Australia, ACT. So all of that resonated so 100% and beyond with what we are trying to do in our community and Australia-wide, like trying to avoid any marketing pressures or association with industry whatsoever. The problem is, it is where the money is. And so as an organisation that tries our very best, we have no money. Yeah. Because that's, you know, what you see the problem that we have. And I know there's a lot of other organisations that follow the same kind of ethos as us. And, you know, we do actually do some great things, even in Canberra, in relation to our support for families, particularly those who are more vulnerable in the community. And again, it comes down to our capacity and what we can do, because we're hell-bound to not be associated with industry, food industry whatsoever. And, you know, something that we really try to do is call on government to recognise that and actually put some of their money where their mouth is and, you know, support organisations like us to do the work where it matters. So thank you. Yeah, it's really more of a statement. It wasn't a question. I just realised I went on a rant.
No, it's great. I love you. If that's a rant, I love it.
But I guess my question is, how do we, it's the coalitions, isn't it? It's working together. It's advocating and trying to rise up above those lobbyists that have all the money, that has all of the you know, from all the sale of this terrible stuff. Yeah. You know, it's, we often, the three of us, we just often feel a little bit like we're drowning. Yeah. Well,
you know, $700 million in sales last year by the baby food industry. I mean, you slice off, you know, 1% of that, and you're paying some really powerful lobbyists in Canberra, right? Now in Australia, the Howard government put a gag order on NGOs, non-profits in Australia that receive government funding, right? So you can't, if you get government funding, I may be wrong on that. I don't want to misinterpret that. But anyway, what I'm saying, this is a structural issue with how non-governmental organisations are funded in Australia. And as the government moves more and more towards austerity and funding less and less of our social, you know, civic life, including our NGOs, what happens? That's a structural pressure to then go to industry and take that money. So if I hear you, I feel it, and it's really hard. So what does that mean structurally in Australia? How do we turn that around? I don't have the answer, but I think there are some really interesting conversations here around how we do that. But not sure if I answered that question well. Yeah.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for that talk. It was very comprehensive. What do you think the Mothercraft Society could be contributing in the political space?
Oh, that's a really good question. I guess I have to be really careful about what I say and, not try and radicalise all of the members here in the audience too much. But, I mean, I just say this to my students and the talks I give, all over the place. It is radical that this industry is in the governance of this in Australia. It's pretty radical that the policy here is being dictated by lobbyists for these transnational corporations. How are we matching that? Are we radical enough? I don't have an answer to that. That's just a question. The second thing is coalition building. Coalitions is where the rubber hits the road with advocacy. And imagine if, ABA, the Healthy Food Alliance, Canberra Mothercraft Society, the AMA, the midwives, the nurses, imagine if PHAA, imagine if there was a huge coalition all unified around these singular messages. And in many of these issues, there are already these coalitions. And I think that's just such an important thing to keep building. And the third is probably like coming back to what was said earlier about, how do we fundraise? If these lobbyists are, being funded by a $700 million industry, like we do need to resource this somehow. And I don't have an answer to that either. But perhaps the members and people in the audience do. I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question well, but some ideas, I guess.
Thank you. Now, I have a question about the lobbying and what the role of, on that list of people who are on this Commonwealth thing, whatever it is, that included AusVeg and Meat and Livestock Australia. It's primary production kind of lobby groups and organisations. And I guess my question is, what is their incentive here? Because they contribute both to the kind of healthier, not ultra-processed food part of the food chain, food mix, but also presumably they're heavily reliant on selling to manufacturers of ultra-processed food. So how, what role do they play? What role do you see that they play? And how is there an opportunity to have a conversation with some of those organisations about reputation and profit and, where actually they would be, would they do better if they could sell more into the non-ultra-processed food side of the industry?
Yeah, thanks. That's such a good question. And I'm so glad you asked that, because that actually gets down to this question of the economic incentives in our food system. And like I said earlier in the presentation and in the Lancet series, we did this huge analysis of the financial performance of all these different corporations across the food system, including in the fruit veg sector versus, primary processing and ultra processing. As I said, ultra processing is much more profitable. Now, when ultra processing is much more profitable, that's going to shift all of those producers. Doesn't matter who they are: the dairy producers, the veggie producers, the fruit producers, the meat producers. They're all, producing more and more of that commodity share is going to ultra processing. And the reputational incentives are not going to cut it. You cannot go to these companies and say, we might name and shame you, or you might get a bad rep if you don't start producing differently. When their shareholders and the banks and the funds behind them are all pushing them in the other direction to make more profit, grow their sales, once those financial logics and imperatives kick in, the whole system pushes towards ultra processing. So that's a really key insight. The only way to disrupt that is to make ultra processing less profitable. So that that means, I think this means just getting all of the industry out of the room, consulting with industry. I'm not saying we need to completely, not talk to industry. If we do, it needs to be done transparently, on the record. We need lobbying reform. We need political donation reform here in Australia is a big part of that. But also on a positive note, because my talk has probably lacked a bit of that, there is also a great opportunity here to spin this or to create a really positive thing for Australia, which is a healthy and sustainable food economy that creates jobs and economic opportunity, especially from our local and regional food producers. So, for example, imagine if in the ACT or in the food bowl, regional area that ACT, gets its food from, which you see at Epic Market or at Fishwick Market. Imagine if we started supporting those local producers. Imagine if we started subsidizing and making it easier for businesses to start producing those healthy foods that we know we need, that meet those criteria, while at the same time we're regulating out the corporates. Those sorts of ideas are where I think, what we put forward in the Lancet series is being probably where we need to go. And that also has the benefit of keeping the profit, the income, the wealth that our food system generates localized as well. We're keeping that wealth in the community. It's not being extracted by Nestle or whoever to some invisible shareholders.
Thanks, Phil. It was fantastic. First of all, a comment about what is Canberra Mothercraft Society doing. What I can tell you is for the last 22 years or 23 years of them providing direct services to family, they did exactly as you described. But what they were surrounded with was, and it's not unusual, Australia's not different, Canberra Mothercraft Society had a primary health model of care informed by social determinants of health. They were right there and directly informed by guidance, the WHO, the UN guidance. But what they were surrounded with was health professionals who constantly, that's not about us, that's about low resource contexts. Right. And that's not unusual. You go to high resource countries and that's what you'll hear. But it's alive and well here in Australia. What do we do? What do we do that the whole health scene owns and delivers on these really valuable guidance documents?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you asked that because this is a thing I didn't really talk about at all in my talk, which is models of care. And, how is birthing and care done in Australia, by whom and for whom? And this highly medicalized form of birthing and care is deeply and profoundly linked with, disruptions to healthy infant and young child feeding. I'm pretty sure most people in this room are completely and well aware of that. Moving towards a woman-centered, midwifery-led model of care, and we write about this in the Lancet series, didn't we, Julie? Is absolutely the way to go in terms of if you want to generate those more positive outcomes for infant and young child feeding and nutrition. The problem in Australia is that we are so locked in to that medicalized way of thinking that, this is a political question too, because it's about the power of these different professions in our society. Midwifery, and I'm literally speaking to midwives right now as we're about to have a baby in a couple of weeks, and asking them about this and the struggles that they've gone through and the challenges that they face every day in their work. And even just to mainstream a midwifery, like a universally accessible midwifery service in Australia has been a real struggle, right? If you talk to the midwives, that's what they'll say. And there is a reason for that. That reason is political, and it has to do with the power of the professions. And I think that needs to be something we need to talk about more. I don't think it's talked about enough. that obviously resonated with a lot of people. I probably should have put that in my talk, but all right, yeah.
We are speaking to a radical, connected group of health professionals, and we will call upon you to use your networks to share Phil's paper when we disseminate it to you. Just again, thank you, Phil, for joining us.
Thanks, Tish.
You're welcome. We are going to also thank the audience, and thanks for coming and your contributions. We also had a number of people online watching, and I'm sure we'll have some questions and remarks coming from those folks later that we'll share with you. We'd love to join you for a little nibble and a drink. The National Film and Sound Archive have opened the library for us also, if you're wanting to have a little bit more of a private conversation, but feel free to join us, network, have a chat. Thank you.